What do I think of the state of poetry in America? Americans don't read poetry, at least not very many Americans. And I don't know what happens in this country, because it hasn't happened in other countries. You go to France or Russia or Germany, even to an extent up in Canada, certainly in South America, in certain countries, a new collection of poems come out by a poet that people have been reading, and they are lined up like they are in America for a bestseller by Stephen King, or for one of those Harry Potter books. I don't know what happens in America. Perhaps it's the quality of poems being taught in the schools, the high schools and junior high schools. But they were fine by me. Of course, I had a grandfather who wrote poetry and published poetry. Certainly wasn't a big name poet, and he wrote a lot of political stuff, but he wrote it and bought me books, of poems. And I really can't even say that it's the textbooks, because I've made an awful lot of money off of a very small little poem called Yellow Leaf, which ended up in I think a 9th grade American literature textbook. I can't remember Holt and I forget that it's a McGraw-Hill. I forget. Anyway, a textbook publisher. So if they're publishing me, they must have quality poetry, right? But for an example, I've published in the last couple of years, I've been very fortunate, besides publishing a lot of individual poems, which I always do. I also published a biography that I've been working on. I've been working on 35 years of Charles Taze Russell, an 18th century, 19th century theologian who really did an enormous amount of changed the Christian perspective for millions of people who follow his teachings, as do many who follow Luther or the Wesley Boys, Fillmore and others. That book has gone into a second printing. It's done well. It'll continue to do well. There is talk about translating into some other languages. A novel that I have written about life in a small town, really about Indian relocation and the last Quinault woman to live in the old ways, doing moderately well. It's fiction, and being purchased by people other than just friends and family. I wish more friends and family would purchase. It'd be nice to be supported by your friends and family. And then I did a collection of poems, which was my 9th, Tecopachuk the Buckley poems. Now, you would expect a collection of poems about a specific place, a small mountain town in the Cascade Mountains, life in the 30s and 40s, a reflection to the way things were for my generation, and for many generations before me, and the generation behind me, and the one behind that. What the town was like when it was a town and had a theater. Some signature poems of mine in there about Dancing with Father, other poems. Now, you'd expect a collection like that, because I'm used to my collections of poems. We sell, I think we sold 1,300 is all they ever sold of the Abbey poems. Stumbling Through the Stars, maybe half of that. And, major publishers consider if they sell 2,000 or 3,000 copies of a collection of poems by the current Pulitzer Prize winner or something, that they've done well. And most of those are purchased by other poets or libraries. And I can tell you that the sales on my Tecopachuk poems was mostly other poets. People of that town didn't buy it. People that I went to high school didn't buy it. Family members didn't buy it because it's poetry. And they have the feeling that they're not going to be able to understand it, which is, and I don't know where people get an idea like that. It's poetry is so easy to. It's like looking at pictures. It's just so easy. So the state of poetry in America is really quite dreadful. I think we've reached the point where poets are writing for other poets. Now, fortunately, there are a lot of poets out there. These poetry slams, these that have started in the last 20 years, are kind of breathtaking. And you bring a named poet to either Creighton University or UNO, and you'll fill that auditorium. Of course, some of them will be writing students or English students who have to go because they have to write a paper about it or something, which always helps fill the empty seats. And the rest of the seats will be filled by poets living in the area. And there's, 30, 35 of us in just this town alone who have pretty good publishing records and have several books out. That's true in every city across America. So Bill Stafford was right. There were 3 or 4 or 5 maybe creative writing schools attached to universities in the 70s when I went to school in the MFA program at University of Washington under David Wagner. Today, every community college has one. We're grinding out people with degrees in creative writing, as fast as we are PhDs. And they're all driving cabs, aren't they? Or working in fast food places or selling insurance or something. We overdo everything. Bringing in writing as a curriculum and making a degree for it was smart business. But where are they going to get jobs? And the sad part is that most of the poets don't buy poetry books. They started a poetry club, the American Association of Poets, and it didn't survive because not enough members of the Academy of American Poets, of which I think I'm still a member. The poets weren't buying collections, even when they could get them at club discounts. I did. I've got a wall back there. The wall you see the lamp on the mantle over there behind my shoulder? That entire wall, all the way back to the corner, from the ceiling to the floor, and I would say that's, I don't know, maybe 15, 16 feet deep to the wall, maybe further, is all poetry. Big name poets, little name poets, poets from old poets, young poets, poets from centuries past. I've read so much poetry in my life. I enjoy reading poetry. I enjoy buying. I used to make it a habit every month to buy a book by a friend, because I know so many people who publish. A book by somebody I'd never heard of, on a press I'd never heard of, a small little press, and a poet of a collection, something by a named poet that I wanted. 3 or 4 books every month when I had the money to do it. And sometimes when I didn't. So I have people who own used bookstores. When Dan Gleason was alive, he used to drool over my poetry section because he said he could make so much money. Because out there, believe it or not, there is somebody right now who's looking for a first edition copy of one of William Stafford's books and is willing to pay big bucks for it. And if it is signed by Stafford and inscribed, even more, and if it's inscribed to somebody else who's another poet, it's worth even more. So they would love to get a hold of that library and be able to sell it. And I don't know what to do with it. I thought of leaving it to a university, but you can't count on libraries keeping things like that. My kids work at a recycling center. My God, libraries are forever destroying incredible books and collections. The library in Lincoln has a heritage section of Nebraska writers and authors. I've got to call them, by the way, to see if they have my last 3 books. But so many libraries just throw things out if they're so old and haven't been checked out. No matter what they are, I've seen classics thrown out and pieces, It's just dreadful. Well, we're such a wasteful, and they're chopped up and turned into bedding for farm animals. We don't even send them to countries who would love to have some literature and books to read. We got to make a little money off of the scraps rather than help other people out. The state of poetry in America isn't very good. The first collection of poems that I published back when I was the University of Nebraska collection, Lights Along the Missouri. I think in those days a collection of poems sold for $3.95 or something. Now they're like $19.95. I sent out, in those days there wasn't email or anything like that. I sent out notices to everybody on my Christmas card list, all my friends, all my family. I joked with the editor and the publisher there, Richard Duggan, who's still, I think, still teaching there. Maybe not. Maybe he's retired now. So I think he's my age. And I said, well, this will be a collection of poems you'll actually make some money on, because my friends and family are supportive of my work. It's not true. In fact, most people turn that out to be true. Is heartbreaking. In fact, most people don't even know what it means to be supportive of a poet. Most people don't even understand the etiquette. Like I'll send free copies. Like I publish something, maybe I'll get 10, 20 copies that are free from the publisher. And then later I'll get royalties when they've paid off what they've invested, then your royalties start. So I will send copies. I'll keep one for myself, keep one to Gary. I'll send a copy to somebody who's helped me edit the text or something. And then I send free copies as gifts at birthdays, Christmas, to friends and family. Now, when an author does that, what's anticipated is that they will read the book, like the book, and then when somebody else's birthday or Christmas or comes up, they will buy a copy and give it to them. And that's how they support you. Support means dollars and cents, doesn't it? I will help you make a living from this by buying your book and giving it to other people. I have a friend in Olympia who does music, makes money. I don't know what he's forever reading books of mine that he's borrowed from other people. Or I'll give him a book and he will loan it to 12 people to read. Yet if he played at one of his gigs at a club and they recorded him and then never called him back but just played the recording, not only that but loaned it to other clubs to play, and he never made any money off of it, he would be in the courts over it. But he doesn't see how that's true, with literature and stuff. I don't know how I got off on that, because I was supposed to talk about the state of poetry in America. It's not very good. There's a tiny little pool of poets that like some of the other poets, and if they don't buy their books, at least they go to their readings. There's probably an even smaller number of people who don't write poetry, but who actually do read poetry, who buy some books. But it isn't like being T.S. Eliot, or even he had to have a side job, didn't he? I don't know why Americans don't like poetry. I don't think there's anything wrong with their textbooks. I mean, it may be the fact that everybody who is a teacher in the American school system they all have degrees in education. Very few have degrees in what they teach. So the person who teaches English and history and geography may not have degrees in any of those things, and so they don't know much about poetry. And I think one of the reasons our education system is so bad is because everybody has degrees in education, not in things that need to be taught. I think we have to change that. You can't teach history unless you have a degree in history. You can't. That's the way it should be, and we should be slowly changing over to that. Because if we had poets teaching poetry, There would be creative writing classes going on in high schools that would make the muses drip from exhaustion. And they would be people reading poems because they could be ignited. If only a poetry reading was attended with the enthusiasm of a football game, life would be great. And wouldn't you know, I'm one of those people who chose to write poetry.